So, as you all know, there's been a number of really high-profile gubernatorial races taking place across the country. And last week, as we get closer and closer to the November 6th midterm elections, there's been a lot of debates that also took place. And last week in particular, we had Beto O'Rourke face off against Ted Cruz. But one that I really wanted to focus on was the debate for the gubernatorial race in Florida between Republican Ron DeSantis and Andrew Gillum. Now, when it comes to Andrew Gillum, he's become a relatively controversial figure to some progressives because after being endorsed by Bernie Sanders, he quickly started to conspicuously move away from the rhetoric that he was espousing on the campaign trail. So, for example, he stopped talking about Medicare for all. He started openly accepting more money from billionaires like George Soros and Tom Steyer. And additionally, he started having individuals like Hillary Clinton and even Debbie Wasserman Schultz stump for him. And look, I don't have to tell you why that's problematic. That obviously is going to turn off a lot of your progressive base that you just won over during the primary. So needless to say, he's disappointed a lot of people within the progressive community, and I think that those feelings are justified. But with that being said, this isn't a Hillary versus Trump situation where, it's lose-lose, and no matter who wins, voters are going to be in pretty bad shape. And I'll admit that Andrew Gillum is definitely not as progressive as someone like Bernie Sanders or even Elizabeth Warren. I kind of view him as more of a Beto O'Rourke / Sherrod Brown type of Democrat. But let's be clear, disappointment aside, Andrew Gillum is no Hillary Clinton. He actually wants to legalize marijuana. He wants criminal justice reform. He's refusing private prison industry money. He'd likely sign a net neutrality bill into law in the event it came to his desk. He actually wants to do something about climate change, which is especially important for voters in the state of Florida. So this isn't like, you're choosing between Hillary and Donald Trump. Essentially, you're choosing between Donald Trump and Sherrod Brown. And a Sherrod Brown type of progressive is much more preferable to someone like Donald Trump. Now, Ron DeSantis is a lot like Donald Trump. In fact, he's been very open about his association and similarities to Donald Trump, and he even released an ad that I made fun of him for, where he basically just talked about how much he loved to smell Donald Trump's farts.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part.
He's teaching Madison to talk.
Make America great again.
People say Ron's all Trump, but he is so much more.
Big league. So good.
Now, if he wins, he would undoubtedly be a disaster. He doesn't want to expand Medicaid, which is the bare minimum you can do as governor to expand access to healthcare in your state. He doesn't really believe in climate change. He literally made racist comments about his opponent the day after he won his primary. So, you kind of got everything you needed to know about Ron DeSantis pretty quickly. But the good news is that Andrew Gillum is actually polling ahead of Ron DeSantis when you look at aggregate polling data from the state, but it's still relatively close, so you still gotta work hard. But odds are we have a really, really good chance at defeating this type of Trumpian figure that has become all too common in the era of Donald Trump. Now, in this debate between Ron DeSantis and Andrew Gillum, we saw something really fascinating. For all of the loudmouth bloviating and flexing that we often see from Trumpian Republicans like Ron DeSantis, well, he didn't look so tough during this debate. And that was because Andrew Gillum was not fucking around at all. He pulled no punches, and he hit Ron DeSantis, and he hit him hard. So regardless of how disappointed you may or may not feel, he is creating an outline as to how Democrats should perform during debates, because what he did here for the most part was really fantastic. So I've got a couple of clips to demonstrate how he just annihilated Ron DeSantis, and I have one clip to where I was kind of disappointed in him, but for the most part, he's creating this template that Democrats have got to follow, where you just keep them on the defensive and you keep hitting him with all these different attacks that he can barely respond to. So the first topic was related to gun control, and DeSantis was asked why he claimed he would have vetoed a piece of gun control legislation that Governor Rick Scott actually signed into law. And he gave the standard vacuous response we've come to expect from Republicans, but what was really great was how Andrew Gillum responded.
The congressman was against the piece of legislation because he is wholly owned by the NRA. He's not going to stand up to the National Rifle Association. That's why they're running all these ads against me, because they want the man that they bought. In my case, we're prepared to stand up to the NRA. They sued me. They drugged me through court for 2 years, all because we said we would not allow guns to be shot in a city park. Radical. That you cannot shoot guns in a park where our kids play and our families picnic. That's why people are so incensed by this, that because common sense and decency seem not to be able to prevail in this conversation.
Well, I think the problem that Andrew has, though, is that his record as mayor is one providing over a city that's out of control in terms of crime. You know, when you have the record number of murders, in fact, the guy running to succeed him as mayor was his former chief of staff, and he's sending out literature to voters saying, most murders in history last year, something needs to change. That's right. Andrew couldn't keep Tallahassee safe. He's not the guy to keep Florida families safe. All
right. Well, Ron is being Don, and that's Donald Trump, neglecting all sense of reason and facts. I preside over a city that is experiencing a 5-year low in our crime rate, on trajectory to be at a 20-year low in our crime rate. No matter of restatement of what he has to say is going to change the facts. This is CNN, not Fox. You have to bring facts to the conversation.
Record number of murders last year, yes or no?
And in our case, we are the 8th largest city and are 27th in crime. This is what Florida voters understand. What Florida voters understand is that communities will experience crime. Just in Jacksonville earlier today, 6 people shot. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And what I'm going to do is take on the NRA and hold them responsible for the rampant crime in our communities.
I want to ask, that right there is how you do it. You hit him, and you hit him hard, and what Andrew Gillum did was exactly what he needed to do to demonstrate why it's the case that Ron DeSantis wouldn't act when it comes to gun control legislation, even the most moderate and sensible gun control legislation. It's because he's a bought and paid for shill by the NRA. And as Andrew was hammering him, you could literally see on DeSantis's face just how nervous he was. I mean, he was fidgety. He wasn't sure how to act. He was clearly anxious.
All because we said we would not allow guns to be shot in a city park. Radical.
I don't think I've ever seen a candidate that visibly disturbed on stage by what his opponent was saying. That was just brilliant. And in part, I don't necessarily think that this is only because Andrew Gillum is such a skilled debater, because he is, but I also think it's because Ron DeSantis is such a weak debater. Now, in this next clip, Ron DeSantis was called out for dog whistle racism, because you're going to hear about all the things he's been saying throughout the course of this campaign, particularly after Andrew Gillum won. And what he's going to try to do is change the narrative. Instead of him being racist, he's going to say Andrew Gillum is actually anti-Semitic because he signed a pledge of this group that advocates for BDS of Israel, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and that is anti-Semitic. Now, watch what Andrew Gillum does to change the narrative back to Ron DeSantis and get the heat off of him and onto Ron DeSantis. It's just masterful here.
One of your donors called President Obama the N-word. You denounced his comments, but you did not return the money. The morning after your primary win, you said Florida voters shouldn't, quote, monkey this up by electing Mayor Gillum. You insisted your comments had nothing to do with race. But what do you say to Florida voters who have concerns about your keeping the money from that contributor, your comments, and about your tolerance?
Because he made a mistake, he apologized. Here's the deal. You know, you look at my record, whether it's in the military, when we're downrange in Iraq, it didn't matter your race. We all wore the same uniform. We all had that American flag patch on our arm, and that was end of story. You look at me as a prosecutor working with law enforcement. It didn't matter the race of the victim. We were there to support the race of the victim. So Floridians can know that I'll be a governor for all Floridians. That's the only way you can do it. It doesn't mean we're going to agree on every issue, but you know what? If we disagree tomorrow, maybe 2 weeks later, we'll find some common ground. So that is what I believe. And here's the thing. I look at what Andrew has done in terms of aligning himself with groups like the Dream Defenders, who he stood on the debate stage, said he stood with them, he stood by them. But one of their main planks of their platform is to boycott, divest, and sanction the state of Israel. They say Israel's a genocidal apartheid state. They attack law enforcement and the police. So that, to me, is very divisive. I don't think he should have signed that Dream Defenders pledge. I think he should disavow them, because I can tell you this, if you want to unify Florida, taking positions about Israel like that, that may be unifying if you're running for the mayor of the Gaza Strip. It ain't unifying here. We're a pro-Israel state, and we need to do that.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, let me just simply say, my relationship with Israel is beyond reproach. I'm the mayor of a city that has a sister city relationship in Israel with the city of Ramat HaSharon. I've been to Israel 3 times, and I've had rabbis from my community come to my defense in this regard. That was a clever attempt to get away from the fact that Mr. DeSantis himself used to moderate a xenophobic, racist Facebook page.
Oh, that is not true.
It is, in fact, the truth up until you became the Republican nominee.
Let's just do one at a time.
When you became the Republican nominee, your response was, I don't even do social media. That was after you got caught. You've spoken at conferences where there have been racist and xenophobic and anti-Israel speakers.
It's his turn to
on the Facebook stuff, you can get added to these things without consent. I never consented to anything. Yes, you can. Okay. I never consented to anything. Once we found out about it, I just discontinued my Facebook thing. He mentions this conference. There was nothing wrong with that conference. I can tell you this, the keynote speaker at that conference was a Medal of Honor recipient named Clint Romeshay. And so you're going to impugn his integrity like you're trying to do mine. You've not worn the uniform. You don't know what sacrifice that takes. That man is an American hero, and I was proud to speak at the same conference that he spoke at.
Mr. Mayor?
Again, the congressman let us know exactly where he was going to take this race the day after he won the nomination. The monkey up comment said it all, and he has only continued in the course of his campaign to draw all the attention he can to the color of my skin. And the truth is, you know what, I'm black. I've been black all my life. So far as I know, I will die black. But this is the point. The only color that the people of the state of Florida care about is the blue-green algae flowing out of the east and the west side of this state, and they deserve a governor who is going to protect this environment after 20 years of environmental protection, degradation.
Now, what we saw from Ron DeSantis was the typical go-to Republican Party debate tactics. And what he wanted to do was reframe the debate from his racism to Andrew Gillum's anti-Semitism. But Andrew Gillum was not having that at all, and he immediately put Ron DeSantis back on the defensive. And before I get to Andrew's response real quick, I want to point out what DeSantis said. He says that this group's platform says, quote, Israel is a genocidal apartheid state. Yeah, he says it as if, objectively speaking, that's not the case. When if you look at facts and you look at what they're doing, you look at the way that they behave, I don't know how you can draw any other conclusion away from that. So he says it as if it's just absurd. No, it's not absurd. Your position is absurd. Now, getting to Andrew's response, that's where he comes in. And not only did he point out that what DeSantis was using was a debate tactic, he noted that DeSantis was trying to deflect, and he says, quote, that it was a clever attempt to get away from the fact that Mr. DeSantis himself used to moderate a xenophobic, racist Facebook page. And then to kind of round things off, Andrew brought it all back to policy and talked about the environmental degradation that has been allowed under Republican administrations. Now I've got another clip where Andrew Gillum really shined. So Ron DeSantis was asked about climate change, and he was kind of tap dancing around the issue or around his answer, and this is the way he's behaved before. I mean, the way that Jake Tapper framed the question was, don't voters have a reason or have a right to know where you stand on climate change? And he just did the same tap dance, but watch how Andrew Gillum responded.
You recently said that you're not a climate change believer. I'm sorry, you're not a climate change denier, but you don't want to be labeled a believer in climate change. Given the threats Florida faces from intense hurricanes and rising sea levels, don't Florida voters deserve to know where you stand on this issue?
Well, what I said was I don't want to be an alarmist. I mean, I want to look at this and do what makes sense for Florida. So, for example, for the people of Northwest Florida, I will be there for you. You guys are resilient. You're fighting. This was a terrible storm, and we will rebuild. But I also think you have to just look at facts. The fact is, you look at South Florida, we need to do resiliency. You have more water. You have flooding. So as governor, that's something that I'm going to take on full throttle. What I don't want to do is do what things like Andrew wants to do, which is do a California-style energy policy that will cause our electricity rates to skyrocket 20, 30%. That's going to hurt senior citizens on a fixed income. That'll hurt our blue-collar workers. So let's deal with the issues that we can deal with. I'm somebody who has a plan to fix, to stop the toxic algae that's been spewing into our rivers, to divert that south of the lake, restore the Everglades, and restore Florida Bay. We can get that done. I think I'm the candidate that can get that done. And I think now's the time to do it, because if we don't take action over the next 4 years, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to restore the Everglades to their rightful place.
Mayor Gillum?
Well, first, what Florida voters need to know is that when they elect me governor, they're going to have a governor who believes in science, which we haven't had for quite some time in this state. I'm not sure what is so California about believing that the state of Florida ought to lead in solar energy. We're known as the Sunshine State. At the very least, what we can do is be a global leader here. We got to teach the other 49 states of what to do and what it means to have a state that, quite frankly, leans into the challenges of the green economy and builds one, and at the same time builds an economy that lasts. I'm proud that the same week that Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, I broke ground in my city on a 120-acre solar farm, tripling the amount of solar energy that we produce. We're prepared to lead, and we've done so in my city, and we'll do so for the state.
So in my opinion, Andrew Gillum's answer there was perfect. And when he came through, I mean, Ron DeSantis didn't really even take any shots at Gillum there, and it didn't matter. Andrew still came through, hit him hard, and that's what you have to do. And the way that Andrew Gillum spoke about climate change was really important, and I think that it would behoove other Democrats to talk about climate change in the way that he's talking about it. Because how did Ron DeSantis characterize the situation? Well, look, what Democrats want to do to, ameliorate climate change is they want to increase taxes, economic issues that would result from their policies. But no, what this is about is investing in clean, renewable, green technology. And Andrew talked about this. He talked about the economic opportunity climate change presents their state with. I mean, they're the Sunshine State. How could you not want to invest in an economic industry that could make you a world leader? It doesn't make sense. So I really feel as though this is the perfect way. You have to reframe the climate change debate. Don't let Republicans monopolize this debate and fearmonger about you raising taxes. This is really an economic opportunity. And Bernie Sanders, thankfully, does talk about it in this way as well. Now, I do want to get to one more clip, and this is part of the performance for Andrew Gillum where I'm going to be more critical, because I think he absolutely appeared weak here. He appeared to run away from his values, and quite frankly, he was not strong at rebutting the propaganda that Ron DeSantis was espousing with regard to Medicare for All.
Andrew's for this concept, Medicare for All, which is a euphemism, because if you read it, it actually abolishes Medicare for seniors. It abolishes Medicare Advantage. It abolishes TRICARE, and as a veteran, I know that military families depend on it. If you get your insurance through your employer, it abolishes that, and it dumps all those people against their will, regardless of if they want to stay in their current plans, it dumps them on a single-payer government system. Taxes will go through the roof. We'll obviously face fiscal difficulties. It will hemorrhage money, and then the government will choose who gets the care and who doesn't. Floridians should have their care protected. Seniors should be able to stay with Medicare Advantage. They should be able to stay with Medicare. If you get it through your employer, you should be able to keep it.
Well, again, and I expect we'll hear a lot of this revisionist commentary in history this evening from Mr. DeSantis. But in fact, what we're proposing to do is to take $6 billion of money that ought to be coming to the state of Florida and to bring that money here to the state. Listen, there are Democrats and Republicans, folks on both sides of the aisle, who believe that this is the right thing to do. Mr. DeSantis, while in Congress, voted to discriminate and allow insurance companies to discriminate against people based off of pre-existing conditions. If you're a cancer patient, if you have diabetes, if you are a pregnant woman in the state of Florida, that is a pre-existing condition. It's disqualifying.
Congressman DeSantis.
So Ron DeSantis said Medicare for All, Gillum's Medicare for All plan would, quote, abolish Medicare for seniors, abolish Medicare Advantage. It abolishes TRICARE if you get your insurance through your employer. It abolishes that. This is the most easy thing that you can debunk, because the opposite is true. If you are a senior on Medicare, you want everyone to get Medicare, because if we have Medicare for All, we expand Medicare, we improve Medicare, and then that makes Medicare better for everyone, right? Because seniors who currently are on it, well, under Medicare for All, they would get dental, They get vision. Their hearing aids, the cost of those would be covered. But he's lying. He's saying, oh, well, this would abolish Medicare Advantage and TRICARE. You don't need those if everyone already has health care. What's the point of keeping Medicare Advantage if everyone has Medicare? See how disingenuous he is? And he also said that if you get your insurance through your employer, it abolishes that. So first of all, the underlying implication about that is if you currently have insurance, you're going to lose insurance, and as a result, you may lose your doctor. But if we have Medicare for all, if we have a single-payer type system, that doesn't change, your doctor. It changes who pays your medical bills. It'd be the government funded by your tax dollars. Now, if you are someone who likes the insurance that you get through your employer, then you would have a security blanket through Medicare for all. It still benefits you. Because what happens if you have health care, health insurance in particular, and you lose your job? You also lose your health care. So what people need is stability when it comes to healthcare. They can't be losing insurance, gaining insurance with the new jobs. We just need everyone to be covered. If you're sick, you get care, and it's as simple as that. So Ron DeSantis is brazenly lying here, but the thing that really bothered me about Andrew Gillum's response is he was obviously doing everything he could to avoid saying the words Medicare for all. For example, he said what he's proposing is he wants to accept the Affordable Care Act's Medicaid expansion. Okay, that's certainly great. That would expand access to hundreds of thousands of Floridians. Still not the same as the universal coverage that would be, the goal with Medicare for all. But it was very, very clear he was doing everything he could to not explicitly endorse Medicare for all. And that's because you can tell based on his rhetoric that he's moved away from that since he actually won the nomination. Now, at this point, when you have someone like Ron DeSantis hitting that hard against Medicare for all when he's been on the defensive most of the time, and also judging by Andrew Gillum's responses to other answers and how hard he hit there, for him to not pounce on DeSantis here with this blatant bullshit, you can tell that was deliberate. He didn't want to talk about Medicare for all. So, that point was definitely disappointing. The most disappointing point specifically of the debate. But by and large, when you kind of step back and look at Andrew Gillum's overall debate performance, he performed exceptionally well. And I think that he's really creating a template, generally speaking, right, for most portions of this debate as to how you refute Republican Party propaganda. You just hit him over and over and over again to where he is not able to even defend all of those points because you're hitting him with so many different attacks over and over. And that's exactly what Andrew Gillum did there, and it was just masterful. So, by and large, to say that I'm not disappointed in Andrew Gillum would just be lying. I think we could be objective and acknowledge as progressives he's moving away from rhetoric that he talked about during the primaries. And that's disappointing. But at the same time, in a race between a Trumpian Republican, or in a race against, rather, a Trumpian Republican, he's no Hillary Clinton. I think that we have to be realistic here. He's no Hillary Clinton. I mean, Andrew Gillum would obviously do lots of good things for the state of Florida, in spite of the fact that I don't like that he's trying to run away from Medicare for all. And look, that's not to say that he's not going to pursue a state universal healthcare initiative. I mean, when he was first elected, he said that he would come together with other governors and try to figure out a plan to get to Medicare for all, or a universal coverage. I mean, it makes more sense to talk about state healthcare in terms of universal instead of single payer, since that's more of a federal thing. But I mean, he said that he wants to do that. So hopefully he's going to fulfill that promise. But referring specifically to the debate here, his performance was outstanding.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.